Hi, you're listening to Deep Cut. I'm Wilson.
I'm Ben.
I'm Eli. Each episode, we talk about two movies by one director, their most popular film, and a personal favorite chosen by one of us.
We'll also talk about each director's life and career to bring context that may help us view their movies as they wanted us to.
This week, Eli chose the director Tomas Alfredson. Which movies are we looking at today, Eli?
So first, we're going to be talking about.
Okay, big question. Which one's your popular pick?
Oh yeah. Let's clear the air because Ben and I were talking before you came on the call, and I was like, which one's the most famous pick here?
Okay, so my thinking with this, we're going to do this episode a little bit of a twist, right? Because normally the most popular pick would be something that is a big hit, everyone knows it because it's good.
Yes.
But we're going to be talking about, as the popular pick, 2017's The Snowman, which is more well-known because it's notorious for being a little bit messy.
And because of memes.
Dear Mr. Police.
Memes make you popular.
I always imagined the voice of the letterer to be this like Smeagol type voice, like a "Dear Mr. Police." Someone like a non-humanoid creature.
You had all the clues. And that's our show.
Thank you everyone.
We'll be talking about The Snowman as the popular pick, and then as the deep cut, just one of my favorite movies, period, is 2011's Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
Yeah. What a movie.
I'm really glad that you guys dug it. I saw your Letterboxd reviews. Wait, Ben, do you want to read yours aloud?
Yeah.
Mine aloud. We'll do a dramatic reading of my Letterboxd review, which is just very important.
It's incredible, this review.
Imagine me after watching this. Damn. That was a lot of work for my big dumb brain. And it was really, okay, it really was a lot of work.
It was. That's no joke.
I was very confused for a lot of it.
I was watching it this time around, just thinking about like, oh, this must be really confusing on the first time you're watching it.
Yeah.
I've seen Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy maybe like 6 or 7 times.
Wow. On top of that, you read the book.
Yes, yeah. I love John Le Carré. This sparked my love for John Le Carré, for sure. I'm going to give a little bit of an entree to Tomas Alfredson. Tomas Alfredson is a Swedish film director. By my count, he has directed 7 theatrical features and a handful of TV movies. His early movie and TV directing was in comedy, and then he moved into dark comedy and finally into horror, thriller, and crime. I did try to find his earlier comedy work, but it's apparently very difficult to find in the States. So I've seen his latest 3 movies, which are 2008's Let the Right One In, about a lonely boy's friendship with a girl his age who turns out to be a vampire, 2011's Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which is a Cold War espionage mystery based on John Le Carré's novel of the same name, and 2017's The Snowman, which is a serial killer or detective movie.
It's incredible that you could just like describe it as a serial killer detective movie, because I don't know if you could describe it as a movie.
Oh, whoa. I mean, when you get to the bones of it, it's just like a genre pick.
Yes.
Both The Snowman and Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy are Alfredson's only English language films to date. He was born Hans Christian Tomas Alfredson in Lindingo, Stockholms Ian, Sweden in 1965. I deserve an award for saying all those words. Thank you.
Not necessarily right, but...
Yeah, no, not at all.
The attempt is admirable.
He seems like sort of a soft-spoken, mannered guy in interviews. A quotation that I thought was funny was, he said, quote, "I always felt like a stranger and an old grumpy old man," end quote. It's just a thing he said about his childhood. So his father was a comedian, writer, and director, Hans Hasse Alfredson. His father wasn't home much, and it sounds like that led to some rough spots in his childhood, but he participated in his father's productions every summer. So when he was 5 or 6, he already knew that he wanted to work in movies. He talks about creating new realities as an escape from hard times when he was a kid. He was also a drummer when he was a kid, which he says helps him when he's editing. So he started out doing editing work. Early in his career, Alfredson helped to create the Swedish television channel TV4, where he directed some TV movies, and it seems like they were mostly comedies. Then in 1999, Alfredson joined the Swedish comedy group Killinganget.
Ooh, I like that pronunciation.
Thank you. I probably butchered it. So, well, if we
What does
have
it
any,
mean?
it's named after one of the main members of the group.
Oh.
Why does he get top billing? It's so strange.
Maybe his name is Ganga and it's about killing him. Killing Ganga.
So Alfredson was the director of the comedy group, and they made 4 TV movies together in their first year. And then in 2004, he directed their only feature film, 4 Shades of Brown.
What is
Some
what is
race
this movie
thing.
about? No, I'm just thinking of poop. That's all I'm thinking about when we call a film 4 Shades of Brown. But that's me.
It's 4 vignettes about family and fatherhood, and they're kind of tragicomedies or black comedies.
Oh.
So Alfredson had 2 other feature comedies before 4 Shades of Brown, which were 1995's Bert, the Last Virgin, which is a comedy about adolescence based on a popular children's book series in Sweden, and 2003's Office Hours, which is a workplace comedy. Alfredson directed comedies until 2008, when his adaptation of the horror novel Let the Right One In premiered. The film played in a number of international festivals and won awards, including Best Narrative Feature at the Tribeca Film Festival in New York. Alfredson directed as well as co-edited Let the Right One In. So, Ben, you've seen Let the Right One In, correct?
I've seen it.
Have either of you seen its English adaptation?
No.
Nope.
Nor have I. Okay.
One of my friends just really liked this movie, and then I think he told me the name of it, and I misremembered it as Let the Right One In
Oh,
because it's called Let Me In.
yeah.
Yeah. So then when I was watching this one, I was like, "Where's Chloe Grace Moretz?"
So after Let the Right One In, he was pretty hot,
Hot.
and he kind of poo-pooed the Swedish entertainment industry. He publicly said that it was, quote, drained of power, courage, and gravity, end quote, which is pretty harsh.
Jesus.
So in July of 2009, he signed on to direct an adaptation of John Le Carré's 1974 novel, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. And that premiered in 2011, and it was a success critically and commercially. It made 81 million on a reported 30 million budget, which is pretty good for a art house spy movie. Also, for Wilson, the cinematographer was Hoyte van Hoytema.
Yes.
Wait.
What is he most known for? Interstellar, I would say.
Just working with Nolan
Yeah.
in general.
Yeah, Tenet,
Tenet.
Dunkirk.
Funkirk.
Funkirk?
But like an all-time great cinematographer. Like you know you're in for a beautiful looking movie when you have Hoyt van Hoytema.
Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy was critically hailed for its mood, direction, and performances, though it's often criticized for being opaque. But I think that that's an asset of the movie. Alfredson said that he was drawn to the book because it was, quote, like a huge crossword, and some crosswords want to be solved, end quote. So I'm bringing him into Deep Cut for us to discuss primarily because I really love Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. It's maybe a top 10 movie for me. As I said, it got me into John Le Carré. I saw it, an early point in when I was falling in love with movies. I saw it for the first time in theaters. Since then, I've kept on returning to it over the years. I remember the first time I saw it being completely confounded, but I felt that engine under the surface, that energy and the mood that coheres the piece. And of course, we're going to get into all that a lot more, but give me a brief preview of your reactions.
I loved it. I am confounded. I would say I got maybe a basic skeleton of the plot. I was pretty confused for a lot of it. My brain was working very hard to just connect all the dots. There's so many white men that it's just really hard.
Half of all the British actors that you know.
Even if it's people that I know, I don't know. I at least Benedict Cumberbatch stands out. But some of them, man, they really were blending.
A lot of bland white British men, and one of the characters' names is actually Roy Bland.
I was watching this with my brother, and then we would just start referring to everyone as their more well-known character, which was just much easier. So it would be like, hey, look at Sherlock. and then we'll be like, hey, look, it's Commissioner Gordon doing something.
It really helps that the main characters are famous actors. They're easily recognizable. So I think it helps, even though like they were all like white dudes, including Tom Hardy. I would say.
Oh yeah, Bane.
Yeah.
Mad Max.
But aside from all like the mental gymnastics that you have to pull, which I think is worth it, like I think this is a tonal masterpiece. That's what makes it so enjoyable, is that even though you don't really understand everything that's going on, you feel the tension, you feel the emotion within each scene. That is enough for me. That makes the movie for me, because I know that with every revisit I'll have with this movie and the more knowledge that I have, the greater the experience of watching this film is. It's sort of like, I don't know, I was gonna use an onion, but that's stupid. Like, I don't know, it's like sort of like those babushka dolls where you're like, oh, there's more and more inside to find out.
There was a British miniseries of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, of the book, before this movie, decades before. And the poster for that miniseries is those Russian nesting dolls.
Oh.
So that's really funny that you say that.
Oh, wow.
For a movie that seems very distanced and cerebral, there's a lot of emotion and mood, both atmospherically and for the characters.
It's propelled forward at the start with like the really stunning cinematography and the score working hand in hand to sort of like push you through the starting gate of the movie, because they're introducing a lot of concepts to you. But I feel like once you start spending time with these characters and sort of getting a basic idea of the relationship that they have to each other, the emotional drive comes through. It takes time, but with more like knowledge and with more time with these characters, it just grows.
I think for me, it was very confusing. I just don't know if I completely think that that's a thing I can gloss over.
That's understandable.
Considering the snowman is also confusing.
Yes.
Oh, well, the snow. Okay.
But I'll get into that. But it's not really it's not a 1-to-1 kind of comparison.
Absolutely not.
No, but I agree with Ben, because I watched The Snowman first, and then I watched Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. And then after coming out of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, I was like, the one thing that stands out in this guy's filmography to me that his movies are confusing, but like one's like a confusing good, and then one's a confusing like what went wrong.
It's interesting that you can be confused, but like be okay with it, and then be confused and be fuck that, I don't want to watch this.
I have a quotation that I think will help us get a handle on the confusing part of Alfredson's filmography. So I found in my research that he talks a lot about how he tries to respect the audience and treat them as grown-ups, as he calls it. For example, he says this, quote, "To look at the audience as someone who is participating in the narration of the film is a good thing because you activate the viewers. Today, there are so many films that are just spoon-feeding the audience and making the audience passive by excluding every kind of mystery or every kind of insecure piece of information. So I think it's really great to see a film where you're invited to be considered as a grown-up and have your own opinion and view on what's going on, and that's what's brought you into a story, is when you're invited," end quote. I do think it's on purpose that there are pieces of information that are out of reach, particularly in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and kind of incidentally in The Snowman.
Yeah.
I mean, he's directed one of my all-time favorite movies, and he also directed The Snowman.
That's incredible.
I want to pose a few questions for us to consider as we're discussing these two movies today. What went wrong with The Snowman? How do we reconcile these two movies? Do they have similarities? Do they affect each other's quality by being made by the same director? Are directors defined by missteps? And I have thoughts on all these questions, and I'm excited to discuss them with you both.
Me too.
I will give partially my thesis up top, which is that no, I don't think Alfredson is defined by this. I was looking at Sean Baker's review of The Snowman yesterday, and Baker says that I think that this is a speed bump for Alfredson more than the defining trend. And I completely agree with that. And I've also done some research into what happened with The Snowman, so I'll be able to share that with you all.
What went down?
You can see some of like his hallmarks in The Snowman. Like
You can.
Dude really loves cold movies. Like he just likes movies in the cold. I saw Let the Right One In, which is also very cold, like it's set in the winter. And he's really into that kind of vibe. Not just setting, but also the way that he shows you things.
Yeah.
There's a kind of dryness to it that's not supposed to be a dig at him at all, but it is kind of how he presents situations in a lot of ways. And you get a bit of that in Tinker Tailor in a good way, but he's also a bit more, I would say, inventive in Tinker Tailor, and he has some really interesting choices in Let the Right One In as well.
Yeah.
I haven't seen Let the Right One In, and like actually these two were the first movies I've seen from Alfredson. Like even though we can all agree that The Snowman is sort of like a misstep in his career, I do think there are like some elements that I don't know, I like particularly enjoyed in this. No, I can't believe I'm gonna be the one that's defending this movie. But
Yeah.
I do think it is very, very beautiful to look at. The landscapes are gorgeous. I think they shot Norway very beautifully, and the way that the scenes are lit. Like I think for both Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy and The Snowman, they're just pretty movies. I approach watching The Snowman with an appropriate level of like non-sobriety. Like I was inebriated. I was slightly inebriated. I had a good time. I like was laughing the whole movie. Like if you go in expecting a shit movie and you prepare yourself for it, I think it's a really fun experience.
I was not inebriated, but I'll say that I wouldn't go to bat for The Snowman, but I would absolutely go to bat for Alfredson. There are reasons why The Snowman is the way it is. Basically, a lot of it has to do with the amount of time that they had.
Mhm.
We'll get into it.
I just personally don't really enjoy watching bad movies, even like the ones that people are saying it's so bad it's good. Like I just do not enjoy the experience, and like watching it for the podcast was so honestly aggravating.
I can imagine you watching. I just like no, you do not like bad movies. It's like
I just don't want to deal with having to think about it when it's like there's a huge wall I gotta cross before I start thinking about this as a critically as a viewer. I have to climb that wall of all the things that are wrong with this movie and then
Yes.
talk about not necessarily the merits, but like I could like pull it apart as a bad movie or find some good parts of it. It's just a tough experience for me. But it's just me as a viewer. Like I just don't want to deal with that wall. But I'm here now. I've scaled the
Yeah.
wall.
But like what astounds me, right? Like, oh yes, a bad script, like that's not entirely Alfredson's fault. But I cannot forgive the really dry acting. Yes, it's fine. The dialogue is horrible, and I don't really understand the motivations of the killer, which is probably the most important thing in this movie. And like I don't really understand Harry Hole icon Harry Hole. Um, but at least like I don't know, have these actors feel something. I don't know. It just felt so dry.
Yeah.
Sorry, do we have other things first for you to get into Eli
Oh,
before we
sorry,
start
sorry,
digging
Eli.
deep? No, it's
That's
fine.
okay.
Like Wilson's ready to go.
We'll go. Hold the horses one moment. So at this point, it seems like Alfredson is kind of locking himself into an international career with an English language art house, mostly dark, introspective pieces, which I think is a little similar to like what Adam McKay is doing, going from comedy into drama. But add on top of that, the arc of a director making a successful foray out of his home country into the international mainstream film market. But then, from January to April 2016, he films The Snowman.
But then
Yeah, big butt. So there are two things that we need to do. The first is go over a little bit of a summary of the plot because we've already mentioned some things that, if anyone hasn't seen the movie, I am afraid are going to be a little bit confusing. And then I do want to give you some production history so that you can know how this thing came to be. So The Snowman follows Michael Fassbender as Detective Harry Hole. Yes, that's right. As he's investigating a serial killer whose calling card are building these snowmen who have blank expressions and mailing Detective Hole these notes that are poorly written and have little doodles of the snowmen with blank expressions. which is what Wilson was doing the voice of earlier.
I showed you all the clues. Mr. Police Spy.
The opening scene is something that seems like it's the backstory of Harry Hole, but it turns out to be the backstory of the killer and sort of his inciting motivation. The killer, as a child, his mother had a boyfriend who was a policeman, and we see the killer watch the policeman hit his mother, and then the killer watches his mother drive into a frozen lake. And the idea is that this traumatizes him into becoming a killer, but then he decides to become a killer of women exclusively, of female characters, and not cops for some reason, even though it was a cop who was abusing his mother. It kind of makes no sense narratively and morally, to say the least. But like, I don't get why the killer doesn't become a killer of police at that point. I don't know. I think that would make the movie more coherent and less misogynistic.
Is this an anti-women movie?
It kind of is. It's
Right?
it's a bit misogynist, unfortunately.
The stuff about abortion, I don't know, man.
Yeah, that stuff gets really sticky and weird. So Detective Hole investigates this case, and he meets a number of different characters, including Rebecca Ferguson, who has a personal stake in the investigation because her father, Val Kilmer, was a detective who was investigating the case years earlier and got killed by the killer. It's kind of messy, but those are the bones of what you need to know to follow our conversation.
Yeah, that's about that's about it.
Now, what I really want to do is give you some background on the production, which helps explain the quality of the film. So originally it was going to be directed by Martin Scorsese until the production for Silence came up. He dropped out and Alfredson stepped on.
The man dodged a bullet there.
The financing reportedly came together very abruptly, and Alfredson said that they didn't have time to film the entire story because of a rushed production schedule. And in post, he realized that a lot was missing. Around 10 to 15% of the story was missing. Reshoots took place later that year. It seems like with a new crew. I think you can tell. I think some shots look like they were filmed by a different crew. And then the editor is credited as Thelma Schoonmaker, Martin Scorsese's go-to editor.
Shout out.
But Claire Simpson, another famous editor of movies like Platoon, is also credited. So it's hazy as to who did what cutting anyway.
I paused it during the movie and they're both credited, but they have separate title cards. Schoonmaker's comes on first, and then Claire Simpson's comes on after.
Was it right after each other?
It's
'Cause
right
I don't
after each
remember.
other. Yeah. Because I was watching and I was like, Schoonmaker. I was like, what? And I had to like go back
Yeah.
to make sure. I was like, oh, she edited this?
I think right off the bat, that opening scene feels so rushed. Like these shots are begging to take longer. I don't know what happened with the edit, at least is where something could have been salvaged.
But where did it go wrong?
I'm trying to name multiple points where I think it went wrong.
I would say that, like, on a base, right? Like, I do think that there is a problem with the plot of the movie. And that is like a source material problem. Would you agree?
I definitely agree. Like, the thing as a whole doesn't work. Hole. The thing as a hairy hole doesn't work.
There are 3 screenwriters credited, including one of the writers of the Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy script, Peter Strawn. Reports are that the script wasn't done by the time they started shooting.
Right.
On an episode of the podcast, How Did This Get Made, which is hosted by Jason Mantzoukas and Paul Scheer, there's an episode about the Snowman. They recorded live,
Nice.
and an audience member speaks up about having worked on the movie, and she saw earlier drafts of the script. There are vestiges of what used to be a part of this movie that exist in the final thing that no longer fit. Like how he's sleeping on a playground at the first time we see Harry Hole. That's because they were developing a backstory where he accidentally shot a child on a former case. There was a big question in the writing process about why the killer doesn't go after cops, but rather women, because he's angry at his cop father who drove his mother to kill herself. But that never locks up. As Wilson said, the motivation of the killer is completely messy.
The thing is so confusing because it's set up in such a way where the prologue, you're not supposed to understand the prologue, right?
Yeah.
You could understand it as the backstory of Harry Hole, and then it becomes a reveal that it's actually not him, right? That could be a way to interpret
Yes.
the prologue.
Yes.
What happens as a result of that choice is that Harry Hole has no backstory. We know nothing about him in the end, other than he had a relationship with Charlotte Gainsbourg that didn't work out, but kinda did.
Oh my god, the scenes between both of them are so weird. There's like so off-putting when they're interacting with each other. And also him with his not son, but he wants to be a father figure to this boy. Like what was that whole relationship about? Like what were they trying to say?
And wait, the other dude was also Gainsbourg's husband, and he's just there like this third wheel.
Yep.
And I didn't understand that at all.
I got nothing for you. So Oleg was originally supposed to be Harry's son, which would have made more sense.
I thought it was his son the whole time. That's the thing.
Even after the multiple times where they were like, he is not your dad, like they're not your biological son.
I really thought that was just a thing I'm supposed to just know, like he's the son, and like why else would he give a fuck about this dude? Why else?
I think it's just so funny to see how many missteps this movie takes. Like in wildly separate fields. I don't know, like the acting and the plot, or like the editing. Every minute you can find something to critique about this movie.
I like David Densick. He's a good actor.
Who did David Densick play?
He played that creepy doctor who brought the woman to J.K. Simmons.
Oh yeah.
In Tinker Tailor, he's Toby Esterhazy.
Yeah, he's
Right,
great.
right.
I always remember him because he has like a pretty big forehead.
He
Sorry.
does.
Sorry.
He has a wonderful forehead.
The flashback with Val Kilmer and Toby Jones also just kind of weird. Like I get why it's there. It's the backstory for Rebecca Ferguson's character, but it's weird. And Toby Jones is just a weird goatee, and it's like very distracting.
Going off of that, I have to tell you something about Val Kilmer, and I have to tell you something about Rebecca Ferguson. Val Kilmer, at the time of production, he was undergoing treatment for throat cancer, and he had an enlarged tongue that made it hard for him to say his dialogue. So all of his dialogue, it's all dubbed over. It's either delivered so that you can't see his mouth moving, or you can tell when he's talking that it doesn't add up. And for Rebecca Ferguson, her character gets killed off because she was going to be played by Jennifer Lawrence, who only wanted to be attached for one movie.
That's what?
Also, Harry Hole was going to be played by Brad Pitt.
Oh my god.
Ooh.
Wait, and what about the whole the twin sister thing with Chloe Sevigny?
That was just funny.
That's a choice that was made in reshoots. There was never supposed to be a twin.
And also that Snowman looks like a dumbass. Like it looks so stupid. Like whenever it came up, and it's the way that its mouth is drawn or put on is the same every time it shows up, and I'm like, this is such a dumb looking. Like I would just be like, kill me now. This is so stupid.
Are you talking about the drawing or the actual Snowman?
Both.
Yeah, they both look bad. Like,
is this a child committing these murders? I don't know.
Kinda.
yeah, nothing makes sense.
Also, people living in Norway speak Norwegian. If you watch the TV show Skam, you would know that everyone in Oslo does not speak English.
Okay, you just brought that up to bring up Scum.
Okay, this happens all the time.
You know that movies set in foreign countries are sometimes in English if they're made through an English movie
like
system.
Chernobyl is in Russia and everyone speaks
It's
English.
It's true.
Hey, you know what my favorite line in The Snowman is?
What? I have a line that I wrote down that's so stupid, but go Eli.
The police chief walks up to Michael Fassbender and says, "Ah, the great Harry Hole." Brilliant. So good. What's yours?
Oh, it's just a stupid line. It's like he grabs a file and he says, "Can I have this?" And then I think it's Rebecca Ferguson's character, and she says, "No." And then he just says, "Can I have this?" in the same exact line reading. There's no difference. And then she says, "Yeah, sure, take it." I'm like, what is going on?
Who's the other guy in the staff?
Oh,
like
yeah,
this
yeah.
other dude. Yeah, I remember that. It was so weird. He just goes, "Yeah, sure." And actually later on in the film, He says, "Yeah, sure," in the exact same way.
There's one choice that you can directly compare between Snowman and Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which I think is kind of telling. Alfredson talks about how on Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, they were very purposeful about on whose face they are ending the scene in the edit, and that says a lot. And then there's a scene in The Snowman when Rebecca Ferguson realizes that Harry is like doing something wrong or missing or something, and she storms out of that library room. The scene ends by tilting up to this random guy who watches her go, like this random other detective who's like, "Everything okay?"
They keep showing that guy, and that's why I found it very weird. Like, it felt like he was supposed to be another side character, but like, I don't even know why he's there. It's so strange.
Yeah.
Like the killer. What is the killer?
Like, then they set up in the library, and then why are they in a library, and who are all these other people around
Also,
them?
that's like the craziest looking library ever.
It's
My
very
God.
empty.
Yeah.
That room is missing all the details that Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy is so lush with. What I think happened on this movie is that there just wasn't enough time. You listen to interviews about Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy and all the detail that they went into. There's an interview with a magazine that's solely about production design that Alfredson did. And there's so much detail. There's such a large team. There's so much time. That is the thing. Alfredson works so well when he has a lot of time to figure out all this minutia that he puts into his movies. And it seems like on The Snowman, there just wasn't enough time. There are some shots and sequences that you think, wow, this is really detailed and this must have taken a lot of time. And I think that that ate into the quality of other scenes and shots. Like, for example, that scene that's just one shot of Harry and Oleg on the kind of above ground streetcar. It's a lateral tracking shot in perfect pace with the streetcar, and it's zooming in on them.
Yeah, that's a beautiful scene.
That's an inspired scene. I think it's really great. And I think that more effort went into those that ended up eating into the rest of the shoot. I think there are some sequences like Val Kilmer getting to the mountaintop to find the body up there that I think is pretty good. I think the ending with the ice field is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Moments where you're like, I see what this could have been if there were more time. And I don't think that there was enough time. I think that's the problem.
Or do you think, I don't know, I just feel like they should have just chosen a different book to adapt.
It feels like the source material for me at least was a big problem. I mean, I've not read the book.
Maybe it's wildly different from the book. Maybe
Apparently the book's really popular.
I also am thinking about once Alfredson moved away from Sweden and started working in Hollywood, he's working with these big studios with a lot of money behind them. When they greenlight a project and when they greenlight a project for a specific time frame, it like most of the time it has to be made within that specific time frame, so you're still in the good graces with the studio execs or whoever's working at the studio. Sometimes that takes a toll on the quality of a film.
Yeah, it's hard to say if it is more how Alfredson ended up meshing with that studio system or where he and the production team chose to put energy on which scenes got more attention. You know, it's sort of like in pre-production, production, and post-production, you can look at things that didn't go smoothly and didn't have enough time. I think that results in a movie that makes a lot of seemingly baffling choices that are that way simply because there wasn't enough time to do something else. It's just a reminder that movies really do take a lot of time and love and attention to detail. Again, I think it's a fluke for Alfredson. This does not define him.
But do you think that there's something you yourself, you chose it as the popular pick? So do you think that there is something special about this movie, how incredibly bad it is, that makes it so primed for meme creation online, and which makes it Alfredson's most popular film?
That's a good question.
Sorry, you don't have to answer that question.
No, I think that's worth thinking about. I chose it as the popular pick because of its notoriety online. You know, it is a meme, Dear Mr. Police. Maybe it's sort of a yes and no thing. If you don't look closely enough at Alfredson in his career, and if you don't watch Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy or Let the Right One In or his comedies, it can be easy to lock him into The Snowman. Maybe that's how some of the Hollywood industry views him now. Maybe in that sense, but as a fan and as a lover of his craft, for me, for an audience member that is paying attention, I don't think the Snowman matters. I clearly admire Alfredson a lot. I think that he's an excellent director. So maybe with that, let's start talking about Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
Yes,
Yeah.
let's do it. Tinker Tailor. Sorry.
A rough overview of the plot. It's 1973. We're in the world of British intelligence. It's the height of the Cold War. A mission goes awry. It's a covert operation to send a spy named Jim Prideaux to Hungary to find out the identity of a mole who has been planted at the top of the British intelligence system. That goes awry. Prideaux gets shot, and there's a big house cleaning that happens. George Smiley, a very composed intelligence official, gets swept out. He's sacked along with his boss, who was in charge of this covert mission. So Smiley is our main character. He gets called back into the service under the radar to find this mole, and the movie is about him investigating what happened around the mission that went awry. He ends up putting the pieces together and finding out the identity of the mole by going on this series of interviews that lead into flashbacks from the subjectivity of the characters who are giving Smiley this information. There are a lot of apparent detours that end up adding up in the end. The movie really floats on its emotion and its mood and its incredible cinematography and sound. Alfredson pays incredible attention to detail with sound, and he has a whole philosophy around sound that he talks about. He likes to create silence around lines and specific sound effects. He says that, quote, "I tried to surround sounds with silences as much as possible, to do something with it and make it recognizable. Sound today on film in general is too much of everything in scenes, and if you surround a sound with a lot of silence, you really hear the sound, and you also have to record the right sound, and you have to put a lot of effort into it. We played around with a lot of the sound perspective and enhanced stuff that really shouldn't be enhanced. Silence is a very important actor in sound editing to lift up certain things and actually hear them. And also on set to give space to the sound guys to have the possibility to record great sounds when you do it." End quote. It's all about pace. It's all about tone. Alfredson says, quote, "Color-wise, we tried to recreate the scent of damp tweed," end quote, which I just love.
And achieved it perfectly.
With the camera, he says that, quote, "We try to convey a way to express that there's a third eye in the room, like the voyeur's perspective," end quote. There's a lot of frame obstruction. I'm just throwing out techniques here as a way to illustrate the depth of care that went into the direction and craft of this movie. There's
Mhm.
so much to pick apart. There's so many details. It's a very fully realized world. Tell me more about your experience watching this movie. We've talked about the confusion, but tell me some scenes that you connected with or characters you connected with. What'd you get out of it?
You were talking about how the sound isolation and keying the audience in to like listen to specific sounds, and the scene that jumps out at me is the beginning of the film where it flashes back to, well, it flashes back to the scene multiple times, but the majority of the chunk of the scene happens at the start of the film when you see this operation in Hungary go wrong.
Right.
The spy is meeting with a Hungarian delegate at a public cafe in this empty dome, like it's pretty hollow, this building, and you hear the sounds echoing of birds chirping, or the combination of insert shot coupled with the sound coming from that insert shot makes you really like key in on all the things that are going on around where the main conversation is happening. He's sort of like placing you in the role as like a spy, and all in that you're noticing these things happening,
Yeah.
and then you're figuring out, maybe even before the character, the spy himself, figures out that something's not right.
There's a lot of focus on the sweat of the waiter,
Yeah.
which is like a big tip off that everything is wrong. Something interesting for me watching that scene is that I don't know if y'all had the same response, but when the operation gets botched, shit hits the fan, people are running around, seems like agents are coming out of the woodwork to kind of deal with the situation. I had a very weird feeling like I just watched behind the scenes of a set.
I love that.
There's something about the way it is shot when one of the guys comes out. He's speaking in some other language. I'm not sure what it was.
I think it
I
might be
don't know if it was
Russian.
Hungarian.
I don't know.
It could be Russian, right?
Yeah.
And he just runs in and he's like, "Oh, you Hungarian amateurs." He's running around like he's like the director, and he's just run on the set and is screaming at everyone for fucking up everything. Like, I watched that scene twice and I felt it both times. This feeling like I can see the facades of the two buildings that flank the conversation that they're having. I don't know if it was something that was done deliberately, but like it worked for me in a very hard to describe way, which is I think something that kind of covers the entire movie for me as an emotional experience. Like a lot of it works in a way that, like on first brush, like on your first watch, it's hard to describe how it works, but it works.
I am still picking up new information and details on my 6th or 7th watch. Truly, like there are things that I noticed this time around that I had not seen before.
Eli, I was gonna ask you, when you approach this film and you're watching every scene, do you feel like you understand character motivations and like why they're doing what they're doing now that you've seen it so many times? And like, is it emotionally clear to you?
Yeah, it is actually, I think. The fun thing is that because it's so restrained and there are often sometimes literal obstructions in front of performances, you can pick up new nuances. Like it's a text that you can really return to and pick up more, even if you understand the skeleton of it and why people are doing what they're doing when they're doing it. I think a really important scene comes when George Smiley asks Peter Gwilym, played by Benedict Cumberbatch, after he's gone on this mission to retrieve a ledger from the library of the British intelligence building. It's a big mission. Gwilym is exhausted. He's angry that he had to go through with this. And then Smiley tells him, from now on, you have to assume that you're being watched. If there's anything that you need to do to clean house, do it. Which means that we cut to the next scene of Gwilym. We've seen him flirting with women in the office, and then he goes home to his flat and he breaks up with his boyfriend. It's a reveal for us, and it's an emotional moment. It's shot from behind a window, but it really is also thematically very important because it shows us the things that people have to hide in order to do this work, the cost of doing this work. Do you guys know the story of Kim Philby?
No.
I was doing some reading about this. I mean, I've read a few, like two Le Carré books, so I know a little bit about this, but you can give us a bit of an education, Eli.
Sure. This real life story is an important piece of understanding the emotional goals of this movie. So, Kim Philby was an important member of British intelligence, renowned amongst his colleagues. It turned out that he had been working for Moscow for decades, and he had given up maybe dozens of his peers. There were people who were his close friends and who counted him as their mentor, and he had been betraying them the whole time. Philby's actions before he was caught led to the dismissal of John Le Carré, essentially
Wow.
blew his work, and Le Carré partially had to leave the service because his identity, I believe, had been blown in some sense by Philby. There's something that Peter Strawn, one of the screenwriters, says, who wrote the movie along with his late wife, Bridget O'Connor. Strawn says in an interview, quote, "We wanted to focus on the human relationships and the human cost of it all," end quote. And Alfredson says, quote, "For me, this is not a story mainly about the Cold War. It's about loyalty and friendship," end quote. This movie is structured through flashbacks where you get to experience the backstory of each character and the emotions of each character as a way of walking you through the human cost for each person of this betrayal that the mole causes. That scene with Gwilym encapsulates that perfectly. And it also casts an inflection onto the ending of the movie when Jim Preto, the spy who was betrayed, takes some, either, depending on how you look at it, revenge or a merciful killing of the mole. It's just such a dense network of meaning and emotion that is set up in this movie.
Kind of circling back to Wilson's question, because you asked about like the emotional clarity after Eli had watched it so many times. For me, I think that was one of the pieces of the film that I never struggled with on my first watch. Like it was immediately apparent for me how everyone felt, partially because the actors are all really good. And I have to say, Gary Oldman does like an incredible and also incredibly subtle performance.
Yes.
It is awe-inspiring the way he plays the character. He does nothing, but then he shows everything in a sense. I was just like watching through it, and the scene where Gwilym's really mad. He thinks that Smiley fucked up and they were betrayed by one of his agents after he picks up a logbook, which he was really unhappy about, and he's punching Tom Hardy. Omen's characterization of George Smiley at the moment is like complete cool. Like he's completely cool. He is not phased, and he signals to the other guy that's working with him to go stop the fight. His face is barely moving. There's nothing going on, but you see it. It leaps off the screen. It's like the tiniest cock of the heads. You know what I mean? It's like he just barely does anything. It feels like he commands the room.
In Alfredson's first meeting with Gary Oldman to talk about casting him as Smiley, Alfredson told Oldman about this very brief scene in the car after they pick up Inspector Mendel, who's a character in some early Smiley books, to be a part of Smiley's investigation team. There's a bee in the car.
Ugh.
Alfredson told Oldman about this scene in which a bee's buzzing around, the couple of other people in the car are swatting it away. All Smiley does is open the window just a crack and the bee flies out.
Yeah.
And Oldman said that says everything about Smiley that he needed to know, and that it was all about economy of energy.
Mhm.
The way that character is played is so quiet, just smartly constructed. Performance and direction of that character are so great.
It's not an easy job to do a quiet or like a restrictive performance when it comes through so loud to the viewer, even though he's doing so little. It really speaks volumes about how Gary Oldman can control his body and
Yeah.
like the delivery of his lines.
And aside though, like I thought he was terrible in Darkest Hour playing Winston Churchill. I really disliked his portrayal of Winston Churchill in Darkest Hour because he kind of overplayed it. Those prosthetics, and he's like being huge about the role, and I was just like tone it down, man.
He's had some really big roles, and he truly goes as minimal as possible here. There's so much expression that comes from his glasses and the way that things reflect off of them, and you can see the
Mhm.
world around them. Alfredson says at some points you can see Hoyte van Hoytema's camera in the glasses, which I still haven't been able to notice, but apparently they're there.
If I'm not wrong, it seems like when he changes prescriptions, it goes from like something that makes his eyes small to something that makes his eyes really big.
I didn't notice that.
I feel like that's true. Somebody tell me if I'm wrong.
Someone correct that.
I bet you're right.
For glasses for short-sightedness, it makes your eyes small. I know this because I have very bad myopia. But when you wear glasses for long-sightedness, it makes your eyes bigger because it's the opposite effect. And I'm pretty sure that that's what they did. I don't think it makes sense. Like you shouldn't just
Yeah.
flip from short to long-sightedness, but it kind of works.
But hey, in the words of Colin Firth's character at the end of the film, it was an aesthetic choice.
Yep. But it's interesting that that's kind of like the smallest detail to kind of give you a sense of which part of the timeline you're in. Because that was the thing I struggled the most with. Like, I wasn't sure what's a flashback and what's not a flashback. The biggest one being Jim Prideaux's reveal that he's alive.
Yeah.
I was very confused. I thought it was a flashback.
Really? I thought it was pretty clear. Like you had the sound effect of him breathing while laying down on the ground, supposedly shot. It made sense to me.
It was just a little unclear. Like, it still worked for me. And like after a while, when the pieces come together, then I'm like, oh, okay, I get what's going on now.
Right.
While we're talking about glasses, I want to talk about a different kind of glass. Lenses.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
There are two lenses that Van Hoytema uses that I want to draw our attention to. The first one is a 2,000 millimeter lens that gets used on the runway when Smiley is threatening Esterhaus.
That's an all-timer.
That plane approaches down a mile-long runway, and it looks like it's the same size as the figures in the foreground. Incredible.
I mean, it's a really good scene because it uses the lens and like the set design, which is the runway, and like the art, which is the plane, to really establish a point that is the undercurrent of the scene, which is Esterhaus being threatened with deportation. It's all there on the screen, and it's really well done.
Yeah. The second lens that I want to point out, I believe it's a 50 millimeter lens. It's used on two shots. The first shot it's used on is when Smiley goes into Control's flat for the first time and sees his face on a chess piece, meaning that he was suspected by Control of being the mole. It's very close on Smiley's face, and the background is fuzzed out. The second time that lens is used is in the incredible centerpiece scene of Smiley talking to Gwillem about his experience meeting Carla. In this movie and all the George Smiley books, Carla is Smiley's nemesis. He's a Soviet spy master. Carla's a figure who we never see his face. Same with Anne, Smiley's estranged wife. They're the two ghosts of the movie, as Alfredson describes it, so we never see them. As Smiley is telling this story about meeting Carla, very important piece of backstory. Unlike the other characters, we don't see a subjective recreation of this flashback. We don't see the character going through the actions. It's just Smiley giving us this monologue in the room. And we see that lens pop up again as Smiley is getting to the key point of the story. It's very close on his face once again. Oldman is looking not directly into the lens, slightly off. He sort of finishes the climax of this story, and then he leans back into his chair. I mean, in a movie of incredible scenes, that one might be my favorite, maybe. It's just so controlled.
And they're both such striking compositions. Even in a whole film filled with like beautiful shots, those like stand out as like the shots of this movie. Like that's a iconic close up.
I think the effect of that lens on Smiley and not on any other character encapsulates a lot of the movie again, because it's a simultaneous closeness to the character and distance. It's strangely close. His glasses block his eyes some, even though you can see through them clearly. There's some distortion. There's just this strange combination of seeing an appearance and sensing a lot of undercurrent and kind of doubting what you're seeing a little bit, and the room around him is fogged. It's a way of using a lens choice to tie to the thematic point of the movie, and I admire that so much.
I think the way we kind of get led into that shot is fantastic. Like the way we are brought into Smiley's monologue, which is also excellently performed. It starts on a single shot of Smiley, and then it shifts to a fake two shot of him in an empty chair, and it works really well. That shot was when I like sat up.
Yeah.
Like when it pans across to the empty channel, I was like, something is going on here. Like something, it's very subtle. It really kind of piques your interest. And he's doing something. That panning shot is a signal that feels very familiar, but the fact that it's an empty chair makes it very interesting. Like it's very in a way that makes you realize that this is a very key scene. And then using that lens choice to really emphasize that this conversation that he's talking about is critical to how the story plays out. And then we don't know at the point in time when he talks about it that this is Carla that he's talking about. But for Gwillem knows exactly that that's what's happening. But especially if you don't know the context, you don't get it. But then when he says it, you realize that, okay, Carla is obviously a very important figure in this kind of universe of the story.
Another incredible part of this scene is that I know this for a fact that spies are good actors because they have to be, because that's their job to save their lives. But it's so rare in thriller or spy movies where you actually see a spy being good at acting. And when he's having that conversation with Carla, I was just like, whoa, Smiley is a good actor. And, and it's just like the depths and the layers of that performance in that particular moment is astounding.
I agree. Have you guys seen footage of Clint Eastwood speaking at the Republican National Convention in 2012?
I've seen the photo.
No, that's very specific.
It's Eastwood monologuing to an empty chair as if Obama were sitting in that chair. It's a ridiculous moment in American politics. I wonder if, because it was 2012, if Eastwood saw Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, saw that monologue of Smiley speaking to Carla in an empty chair, and was like, Obama.
I'm thinking a lot about like the things about this movie that are a bit confusing for me.
Like what?
Like the key location of this movie is the house. It's the house where they meet counterpart of the mole from Moscow side. Early on in the film, there is a very quick scene of that house. Upon like kind of rewatching it, I was like, why did he show us this? Because I remember watching it and being completely confused as to what I was looking at, and then the scene just ends. So it's just the woman that lives in the house, or she's the one that takes care of the house. And she has a dog in the house as well. And there's a very short scene where you just see her in the house and the dog is barking at somebody entering the house. You don't really see who enters the house, and then the scene ends.
In that scene, Ben, Polyakov also enters the house. So you at least get confirmation that Polyakov is part of this spy ring.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really recognize Polyakov at that point in time, right?
Yeah.
It's a weird choice because like it gives you information that is hard to decipher and hard to figure out what to do with, and then it just kind of goes to the back of my mind, and I just kind of forget about it. But on like a rewatch kind of thing, it kind of makes more sense. But I personally don't know if it needed to be there.
There's something that Alfredson says, which is that, quote, even though it's a very calm pace, a lot of things are happening in the film and a lot is happening in your head, end quote. It's definitely too much to keep track of if you haven't seen it multiple times.
Yeah.
No, definitely.
You know, there's a whole conversation that we could have around, does a movie have to be perfectly clear on a first watch? I don't agree with that philosophy. I like having to go back and do digging. There are important elements of it, like mood, that are very accessible on a first watch. You can return for information if you want.
Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy weirdly reminded me of films like A Brighter Summer Day or A City of Sadness from Edward Yang and Ho Xiaoshen, in that they contain like such vast worlds within them, whether it be for the amount of characters in the Yang film or in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, the amount of characters, or like the amount of like plot that sort of gets like dropped in at different places that you have to work to piece together, not just through one watch but through multiple watches and maybe reading things. It's very rare where I personally watch a movie and can forgive not having narrative clarity, what is going on in the moment, which at times this movie like did give me. But I would excuse it for these movies because the tone of it is so great for different reasons. It has such a strong grasp of commanding your emotions. The fact that my brain is like, I don't understand what's going on, and I can just let that slide.
The emotional clarity of the characters helps a lot in making things make sense. Spoiler alert, the mole, which is Bill, big spoiler alert. I watched the film and I had a very strong sense that he was the mole.
Ah, interesting.
And I don't know why.
Wow. I thought it was Percy the entire time.
It's the kind of thing where like Percy is so obviously an idiot that it shouldn't be him, right?
Thanks, man.
But it's not really this like puzzle thing. I wasn't trying to like take all the information. It was a very emotional feeling like Bill is going to be the one because Bill, something's off with him, right? And I was looking at the party scene, and the party scene is very important because it's a flashback that we return to multiple times and a bunch of reveals in it. And there's a part in the party scene where Bill acknowledges Smiley. It's a very short interaction, and it felt very strange because I don't think we get that with Smiley and the other people, like Bland, Alaline, Esterhaas. Like, we don't get that with the other three. And so there's that feeling that there is something going on between him and Bill that is hard to pin down. And it kind of builds a little bit. And we see Bill and his relationship with Jim, and that also puts a target on him. So there's a lot of things like that kind of start narrowing the focus a little bit, but I couldn't really figure out why I had this feeling. Because most of the time when we look at Esterhaas, Bland, and Alaline, it's from a close-up that doesn't necessarily feel like a point of view shot from Smiley. So it doesn't feel like it's centered in his perspective. But that connection moment between him and Bill in that party scene has that connection.
Right.
That kind of makes Bill seem shady.
There's something that you can't know about Bill and Smiley's relationship the first time around. Le Carré writes a lot about how home is never safe for Smiley, which you definitely see here. But one of the ways in which home is infiltrated by Bill Hayden is, of course, the affair that Bill has with Anne, Smiley's wife, to throw Smiley off of Hayden's trail. As an object to represent that, there's the painting that Hayden gives to Smiley, which Alfredson says Hayden had painted, that is in an early scene hanging on Smiley's wall, and Smiley's just staring at it. Like he can feel what's going on, but he can't put his finger on it.
Wait, that's the frame where Alfredson's director title goes up on.
Really?
Like the credits roll, and then the last credit, which is directed by Thomas. I'm pretty sure, because that's why it stood out to me.
That's a great catch, Wilson. That's
wow,
great.
I didn't know I got that.
It's like a little hint. But yeah, Ben, just like that kind of little tip of the hat, there's a vibe around Hayden. There's something that I noticed on this watch, which I hadn't before. During everyone's flashbacks, you experience that flashback from the perspective of the person giving that flashback.
Yeah, the narrative range is limited to just the person telling the story.
Exactly. When Connie's telling her story, we experience that sequence from her perspective. When Ricky's telling his story, we experience that sequence from his perspective. When Jerry Westerby is telling his story, Jerry Westerby, played by Stephen Graham, when he's telling his story of what happened the night that Preto was shot, Bill Hayden comes into the scene and interacts with Jerry Westerby. They go to Jim Preto's flat to clear it out. We get a moment from Bill Hayden's subjectivity in that sequence with Jerry Westerby, where Hayden is going through Jim's apartment and he finds an old photo of Jim and Bill together and he pockets it. Interesting moment.
Yes.
It's just like those little things that don't add up for Bill that then do add up. It's like those directorial choices are giving us the inclination, the hints that Smiley is getting that point towards Bill.
It's honestly brilliant because I don't know how you would, as a director, figure out that this will work.
Yeah.
I don't know if this was the plan, but it definitely had the effect on me. And what I realized is that this is exactly how Smiley and Jim feel.
Yeah.
I think it was Smiley who says, like, deep down, he knew.
Hayden tells that to Smiley in the final scene.
Yes. And also deep down, Jim knew. They just had a feeling. Deep down, they already knew. And I'm like, yeah, that's me. I felt you. Colin Firth, you're too good looking. You're too nice looking. Something's wrong with you. It's hard to break down in it, which is why it works, because there's a bit of that kind of movie magic going on that makes it a good movie.
Right. I have a narrative clarity question.
Go for it.
In the timeline of things happening, when does this Christmas party happen where he finds out that Bill's sleeping with his wife?
That might be one of the earliest things that happens in the timeline.
Chronologically, one of the earliest scenes.
Okay.
Yeah.
It comes before Preto gets shot, certainly.
Precedes all the Budapest. Okay.
It's like before everything, before Control and Smiley get pushed out.
Right. That's why everyone's there.
Everyone's happy, which Connie talks about, right? Everyone's like happy and friendly, and like she remembers them all as like certain kinds of guys.
Yeah. And then also, are Bill and Jim, they're not like, there's no like romantic.
I feel like there has to be, but
because when Hayden's like getting caught and he's like telling Gary Oldman's character, I'm so bad with these characters' names, but like to take care of things, he's just like, oh, there's a girl, give her this and make sure it's okay, tell her that I love her if that makes her feel better. And then there's also a boy. And I was like, oh, interesting.
I don't think that boy is Jim Preto, but I think it plants the seeds that allows you to draw that connection.
Right.
You mentioned that every time we return to this Christmas party, we learn something new. In that fantastic ending montage set to a cover of La Mer by Julio Iglesias, we return to that Christmas party once more. And the information that we get is just Hayden and Preto locking eyes from across the room, and there's something passing between them. Jim deep down knows that Hayden's the mole, but I do think that there's a romantic past for them. When Preto shoots Hayden in the end, I think that that's a mercy killing, and I think that there's some love getting sent along with a bullet as well.
I feel that.
Yeah, there are those tears coming out of his eyes. It's incredible.
Yeah, he's crying as he shoots him. Oh man, there's so much going on with Jim in that scene at the Christmas party. What I kind of inferred is that Bill sleeping with Anne is not a secret for anyone else. Everyone knows he's doing it. And to me, Jim knows it, and that's why there's a kind of aching sensation between him and Bill. That if they were lovers before, seeing Bill sleep with Anne feels off because he knows that there's a very strong connection between the two of them, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's kind of how I read that scene.
Okay, I'm adding this film to my queer film canon. 1 second.
I really just cannot not read it as them being lovers of some sort.
Me
I
too.
agree.
It really struck, that note for me.
That final scene is so great.
Yeah, that's a chef's kiss of a scene.
Amazing montage. Great choice of music.
Yeah.
It's like a cascade of all the feelings and all the relationships all coming down at once.
Yeah.
All the disappointment.
An emotional crescendo.
It's just a reminder what everyone has lost. You see Connie again, you see Ricky again. Everyone has lost something because of this investigation. Like Gwillem and Smiley end up at the top of the circus again so that they can continue their work. But everyone else has lost something, has lost relationships. Also, that song choice, I think, is important. It's a cover of La Mer, which was popular in World War II in Britain. So you can imagine it being part of that sort of happy memory that Connie describes of World War II and when, quote, Englishmen could be proud. You can imagine it being popular then, and this remake might feel like a hollow imitation or a reminder of the ways in which things have worsened. And also just the dissonance of it being such a happy, cheery song and seeing all this misery is kind of fascinating. It's kind of a perfect cap on the movie that I don't think I appreciated as much my first couple watchings.
I can't wait to revisit this film again. It was made to be rewatched over and over again to get more and more information. I just think this is a film that just will get better every time I watch it.
I can promise you that it does.
I do feel worried about this man's career in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Because even though I feel like all three of us are agreed in the fact that The Snowman was like a misstep for him as a director, I do think that the studios will be less forgiving, which I'm glad that he is returning to Sweden now to make his next project. But I really do hope he gets to make bigger budget things in the future, because I feel like he is a director that should be regarded as highly as maybe Nolan is, who has these intricate films with really complex seeming plots that audiences like to eat up. And I think if audiences are served something similar to Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, with that emotional resonance that I feel like has been missing in Tenet, for example, I do think that Alfredson should be the European man that Hollywood gets behind. Sorry, that's my call to action.
Nolan's movies lean towards complex event structures, but Alfredson definitely leans more towards complex emotional interiority. And I appreciate that a lot more. I also hope that he gets to have bigger budgets again someday. There was going to be a sequel to Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy based on the third in the Carla trilogy called Smiley's People with some of the same cast. It's such a loss to me that I don't think we're going to get that movie now. So
The reason why I don't think he has a career in Hollywood is because he doesn't approach the source material the same way as other filmmakers, which is a good thing. I was reading about this for Let the Right One In. These are all adaptations, these three films. Let the Right One In is also based on a book, and his film is based on a very small section of the book that he focuses on the relationship between the boy and the young-looking vampire. The thing that we've kind of been hovering around is that all his films are about human connections, about human relationships, and you have that quote where his films are about human relationships, and that's the thing that he pulls out of the source material. That's why I feel like it doesn't work for Hollywood, because Hollywood just cares about plot, and he throws out a lot of plot to focus on connections. And I think that's why Tinker Tailor is confusing, because he's not giving you all the steps, because the steps are not important. The relationships are more important, and how those relationships change. Same thing he does with Let the Right One In, where he really cares about the relationship between the child and the vampire.
Okay, now do the Snowman, Ben. Do the Snowman.
And now I think that's why he runs into problems with the Snowman, because the Snowman's plot is just incomprehensible, which just throws you off. And then when he digs into the relationships, which is why he spends so much time with Harry Hole and the kid, Oleg, right? There's just so much time spent on this relationship that no one gives a shit about. I think that's the misstep, and I think that's why this is the misstep that Alfredson took. That he was trying to get to the human relationships, but the human relationships weren't very interesting, or there wasn't a way to make them make sense, because either the source material didn't make it work, or like the writing wasn't able to figure out how this matters to the plot. I feel like that's the misstep that he takes, and which is why it still feels like an Alfredson film almost.
Right.
Here's the source material, but let's care more about the human stuff. And then he threw out too much plot. Like maybe that's 10-15%. Threw out so much that it just was too incomprehensible to really understand what's going on. That's my theory.
yeah, that makes sense to me.
But I do think that because, Eli, you said earlier that Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy was a commercial success, and it was like nominated for a few Oscars, right?
Correct.
So I do think there's like a chance. I think it's also Alfredson's name that got Fassbender and the actors that he got for the Snowman. So I do think there was like goodwill in him, and I feel like there's still hope that he could maybe make a comeback.
I hope so. I think we'll see what happens with his next movie, which is called Say Oop. Wait, I gotta get.
Say oops, oops.
Oops.
I have hope for his next movie, which is going to be called Look Out for the Johnson Gang, which is based on a series of comedic Swedish heist films. It's a reboot. It remains a question. Will he have an arc of redemption? Will he continue to have movies in Sweden exclusively? I don't know. But no matter what he does next, I'm going to be there for it. I'm an Alfredson fan for sure.
Alfredson head.
He's an Alfredson.
Son. There it is.
I'm an Alfred stan.
And on that note, I think it's about time to wrap it up.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Deep Cut. Please rate and review because that helps us keep making the show. Be sure to subscribe to us where you listen to podcasts so you'll know when our next episode drops. You can give us a follow on Twitter and Instagram at Deep Cut Pod. Thank you to Justina Yam for our beautiful artwork. Come chat with us about movies in our Discord server. You'll find a link in the description for this episode. Take care, and we're looking forward to talking about more movies with you next time. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. See you again next time.
Hi, folks. Eli here one more time. Ben, Wilson, and I recorded this episode on the morning of December 13th, 2020, and that evening, John Le Carré's passing was announced in the press. It's not much, but I would like to dedicate this episode to the memory of John Le Carré, alias David Cornwell. And if you'll forgive me the indulgence, I'd like to read some of my favorite quotations of his from his writing. From the 1965 novel, The Looking-Glass War. Do you know what love is? I'll tell you. It is whatever you can still betray. We ourselves live without it in our profession. We don't force people to do things for us. We let them discover love. From the 1974 novel Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. Look, we're getting to be old men, and we've spent our lives looking for the weaknesses in one another's systems. I can see through Eastern values just as you can see through our Western ones. Both of us, I am sure, have experienced ad nauseum the technical satisfactions of this wretched war. But now your own side is going to shoot you. Don't you think it's time to recognize that there is as little worth on your side as there is on mine? From the 2016 autobiographical essay collection, The Pigeon Tunnel. Spying and novel writing are made for each other. Both call for a ready eye for human transgression and the many routes to betrayal. Those of us who have been inside the secret tent never really leave it. Also from The Pigeon Tunnel. Spying was forced on me from birth, much in the way, I suppose, that the sea was forced on C.S. Forster or India on Paul Scott. Out of the secret world I once knew, I have tried to make a theater for the larger worlds we inhabit. First comes the imagining, then the search for the reality, then back to the imagining, and to the desk where I'm sitting now. I'd like to imagine David Cornwell still sitting at his desk now, continuing to write. To me, he was one of the great novelists, fascinated by the question of why people do the strange things that they do. I still have many of his books left to read, and I'm excited to read them, and I hope that you do too. Thank you to John Le Carré.